Hi, I'm Madeline James, and today is going to be a chatty video. It's not going to be super edited, and I just kind of want to talk about a few things, and it's going to be a little bit personal too. But there's a few videos that's been kind of going around recently about toxic productivity, and I've watched the ones by Carpenter and Kate Kavanaugh, and I think it's such a really important thing to talk about, and I did post a video a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about essentially the concepts of heroes and childhood trauma and some of the effects that this childhood trauma has on, people and how that comes up in our fiction. And one of the big things that comes out of that is that people have this feeling like they need to push themselves constantly and always be doing more and not leave room for them to take care of themselves. And, if you didn't see that video, go watch it, I'll link it. But that's sort of this conversation of toxic productivity. It brings up something else that I've been wanting to talk about that I've sort of been avoiding, and that is my health issues. So I've mentioned it probably a ton of times and said that I'm going to talk about it at some point, and it's just kind of at the point where it's like I don't know if I'm going to get a clear answer for years. So if I'm waiting for a clear, definitive diagnosis to talk about what I've been going through, I'm never going to get it to do it, but I'll be waiting forever. So I want to kind of talk about toxic productivity and my health problems and writing with a, chronic health problem. So let's kind of get right into it. So before we can talk too much about toxic productivity and writing with, a chronic health problem, I need to finally tell you guys the story of what I've been dealing with. And to kind of do that, we need to go back in time to 2019. I did not remember this until relatively recently, but in 2019, I had suddenly became numb and having problems with my left arm, and I didn't know why, and I think it stretched up into where I was having tightness and problems all the way up through here. And I was worried that I was having a stroke or a heart attack or something, when that suddenly starts to happen. And it was fairly severe, you worry about it. So I went to the ER and they tested me for, strokes, heart attacks. They did all that stuff. They did EKGs, they did everything. And they were like, we don't see anything, you're not dying, whatever. And told me to follow up with a neurologist. And I think I had made a neurology appointment. And I think it was months out because it takes forever to see a neurologist, which we will be coming back to. But I think it was months. My symptoms had gone away after a couple of days and they didn't come back. And then the neurologist that I got referred to canceled the appointment I think the night before. And I just never remade the appointment because I was like, it happened once. It's going to take months to get another appointment. I was over it. And I felt like it wasn't really a thing that needed to be seen. So I kind of completely forgot about it. Life went on. And then in March of this year, I was at work and I noticed that, my foot kept falling asleep. And I was like, that's kind of weird. It does happen sometimes, but it's been happening a lot. And then I started noticing that I didn't have a lot of sensation in my arm. When I touched it, it felt like there was a layer of rubber between my finger and my arm, and I just couldn't feel it very well. And this sort of progressed throughout the day where I had this sort of loss of sensation, mainly in my right arm, but also in my face. If I went like this, it started to feel different on this side of my face. My head felt different, my leg, my arm, my back and my side, just touching my skin, it felt wrong. And I had weakness. And it's kind of hard for me to know how much of it was actual muscle weakness versus having trouble controlling my muscles or having that delayed response. If you asked me to squeeze something, it would take me a while to build up much strength to it. But I definitely had less strength in general, I think, on my right side. I can't remember if I had any other symptoms, but those are the main ones. So this is obviously kind of concerning. So I called my doctor and he was like, okay, come in tomorrow. Which, I probably should have just gone to the ER. I've learned better. But, so I go in, I think the next afternoon. So at this point, it's been 36 hours potentially longer since the symptoms started coming up, and the worst of them had already started to dissipate a little bit a couple hours before the appointment, so I didn't have the same level of weakness. Like, if I squeezed something, it was the same, there was nothing visibly wrong with me. So when I went to my appointment and I'm like, this is what's been going on, they were like, oh, and he like had me like check his fingers and push on his hands and do all that kind of stuff, and he's like, you know, you seem fine. He's like, maybe it's your ADHD medicine, we'll take you off of that and see if it goes away. And I was like, okay, sure. So I I stopped taking my medicine, and it continues to kind of get a little bit better, but the symptoms didn't all go away. Like, I was still having nerve pain and weird sensations in my arm, especially, and a few other places. Even to when I followed up a week later, and I was like, you know, I'm still having these problems. And he's like, well, maybe it'll take longer. I came back in another month. Same thing. And there'd even been, you know, a few periods of times where my symptoms had almost gone away for a day, and then maybe they came back really bad. I think I had one instance where I was having trouble walking again right before that appointment, where it was just like really rough, and I think I'd been sick before that. And so like I was explaining this to him, and before this appointment, real quick disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional. My husband is not a medical professional. I've never seen a medical doctor and had them not ask him if he was a doctor. He has a very weird brain. But we do like to research things, and he just remembers everything. Like, his memory isn't photographic, but he just remembers everything. If you're playing trivia, you want him on your team. But I also find it comforting to look into things. So when I was experiencing these things and the doctors were like, oh, maybe it's this medication you're on, and it didn't really have an effect taking me off of it, I Googled it. I read a bunch of research, and it just didn't make sense. So I Googled my symptoms, and one of the big things that came up was MS. And I was like, and it kind of fit perfectly. So I was kind of expecting, like, okay, I need to see a neurologist. So my plan, regardless of how that 1 month, which was after a week, so I guess 1 month and 1 week follow-up, I was like, even if he doesn't refer me, I'm just going to go to see a neurologist. So I go, and, you know, he's like, oh, you know, I don't know, whatever, I think it's fine. And he finally gave me a referral to a neurologist, and was basically like, you know, if your symptoms go away before then, you know, you don't need to worry about it, don't bother going. And I was like, yeah, I'm going. So I made the appointment with the neurologist, and it was, I think, 4.5 months out. And I was so frustrated at this point, because I was like, I'm having these symptoms. I can still function in my daily life, but, like, when you have nerve pains and twinges and stuff in your hands, like, and I was having them a little bit in my left arm, too, where I had problems back in 2019. And I was like, it was just really annoying and exhausting, and it's just hard to get things done when you just kind of have this, like, constant low-level pain and discomfort, and it was just kind of a pain. But so, you know, we did more research, we looked into it more, and it just sounded like MS, because I had gone and seen a rheumatologist already, and they had tested me for everything, like surgeons, RA, there's a bunch of them, that like lupus, I can't remember all the names of all the things, but like I had a full blood work, because I've been experiencing a few other issues that may or may not be related, who knows, maybe time will tell, but I basically went like, I'm having these problems, and, you know, I already have an autoimmune condition, so she just tested me for everything. And so all the main things that you would test to rule out MS, I had already ruled out. So it was kind of like, well, I probably don't have a brain tumor, you know, I probably don't have this, I don't have really the symptoms of this, you know, and it was just kind of like scary waiting. And so I finally went and saw the neurologist, and I was there for like 2 minutes before he turned to the resident and was like, I know what the diagnosis is. Repeated kind of what I said, like, she experienced this in 2019, then she experienced this, you know, in March. What is it? And is like, you know, it's MS. And that was how they sort of told me that they had this initial diagnosis of MS. And, you know, he talked to me about it and was like, you know, we're going to do these tests. You know, now we don't just diagnose it in the office, but pretty sure you have MS. So he puts me in for a bunch of tests. I go and get MRIs done. It's like 4 different MRIs with or without contrast. It was a whole ordeal. And then the plan was to go and get like a spinal tap later, But I get the results back from the MRIs and they're normal. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I make an appointment, a follow-up for 2 weeks later, because that's the, closest they could see me. And I do more research, and I'm like, oh, you can have a normal MRI and still have MS. They just have to rule more things out and do more tests and whatever. But I was like, okay, so, maybe it's still that. We did some research into some other things it could be. Like, there's certain types of migraines that are, like, silent migraines. And it was like, maybe, but it didn't really fit because, like, the symptoms are just kind of, like, relatively constant. It's not like there's, like, these events of, like, potential migraines where then I have these symptoms. Like, it wasn't really how it presented. So I go back to the appointment, and I talk to the neurologist again, and he basically, I don't know, the impression I kind of got from him was that he was just like, oh, it's whatever now. And he basically said it could be CIS, which is clinically isolated syndrome, or maybe some sort of weird migraine, silent migraine thing. And CIS is essentially like you've experienced what is equivalent to an MS flare. It's still inflammatory, it's still damage to the myelin, it's still like lesions going on that are causing damage, but it won't happen again. And if you actually have a normal MRI, from what I've Googled anyway, and again, I'm not a medical professional, it looks like there's about a 20% chance of it actually being the start of MS. And if you have a non-normal, like, MRI, like clear lesions, it's more like 80%. So I've been kind of going over this sort of evaluation. You can't call it a diagnosis. It's not an official diagnosis. I don't even really know what it is, but essentially I think CIS makes sense. The migraine thing doesn't make sense to me. He didn't go through like all of my symptoms or my logbook or anything, so I don't know. I can kind of take what he said plus my own research and kind of try and figure out what sounds the most likely based off what I've experienced, but CIS makes sense. But the thing that makes me hesitant about it not being MS is that I had positive, like, I had positive physical, like, clinical indicators of MS. Like, he did to check, like, my nerve function and, like, was, like, looking for my, like, neurological responses to things and my reflexes. And he said that I had positive indicators of MS. I don't know if those are also positive indicators of CIS. I don't know. But I had that. And then also, I had the incident back in 2019. And that could be completely unrelated. But that seems like the zebra, not the horse explanation there. So if that was a incident of myelin damage, just like March was, then that is MS. Based off my understanding of it anyway. Like, if it happens more than once, it's MS. I can't get a doctor to talk to me enough to really know if that's a correct interpretation of it, but that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. So, right now, the neurologist gave me a medication for gabapentin, which is an anticonvulsant and, like, a nerve suppressant or something. It's supposed to calm my nerves down and reduce, like, my nerve pain and stuff. So I started taking that. We'll see if it's helpful. It's like 3 pills a day. It's kind of rough, but we'll see. And then he basically said we'd follow up in a year and do more MRIs and see if there's damage that you can see. Because, like, the weird thing with MRIs is that you can't always see the damage that clearly, because you're not seeing the lesions. You're seeing where water is pooling more because there's lesions, I think. So it's kind of like, it's kind of difficult to see it in the MRI. So, like, he said that I have lesions because I have the damage, but they couldn't see it in the MRI. So I don't know if it's just early MS and, the lesions aren't that bad yet, or if, the only people that have looked at my MRI so far are the technicians. So who knows if there are actual visual, like, indicators of lesions there, if it was actually looked at by, like, an MS specialist. I don't know. I do have another doctor that I'm following up with in a few weeks that's going to actually sit down with me and go over everything, and I'm hoping to get some more clarity and kind of a better path forward, because given the indicators that it's more than just CIS, like, I have a history of this happening, and there are more tests that could diagnose MS. It's like, I kind of feel like I should get all the tests done, like, see if there's antibodies in my spinal fluid, see if, there's some, like, nerve response tests they can do. Like, I don't know, if I have MS, I want to know and start treatment as soon as possible. So I've just been kind of like, about that, which is frustrating, but it could take years to get a diagnosis and start treatment on this. Like, looking up and watching people's stories and diagnostic journeys, like, it's a friggin' experience. So this is probably going to be something I'm going to be dealing with for months, if not years, and then actually dealing with the disease or whatever I have wrong with me past that. So it'll be a thing that'll come up here, but yeah. Okay, I'm back. I have a drool spot on my shirt from putting my daughter to sleep, but I'm back. But yeah, so obviously this whole time that I've been sort of thinking I might have MS, it's kind of a lot to come to terms with, and, if you're freaking out, the treatment and kind of prognosis of this disease nowadays is actually really good. Like, they can really kind of stay ahead of it, and I've heard it said that the research into MS and the new treatments and the breakthroughs kind of keeps pace with the progression of the disease nowadays. So, I have come to terms with the possibility that I may have or may end up being diagnosed with MS. So, put that aside, but one of the biggest things that came to my mind when I first started looking into this, and, I feel like there are these kind of scary stereotypical, like, mental images that we have of people with severe progressive MS, like people that are in wheelchairs and, have very little use of their hands. And that was the most terrifying part to me. The thought that I may not be physically capable of writing one day, like, that's really, really scary. And I've done enough research now that, like, I trust in the treatment and the medication, if that's what I end up having, that, I'm at peace with it. And I think most likely it would be fine and I wouldn't have problems. But the thing is, even if you're not physically incapable of doing something like writing, that doesn't mean that having chronic health problems and chronic pain isn't going to impact that too. Just looking at the last, what has it been, like 6 months? I have definitely had days where I can't write because it hurts. Like, I'll have, like, so much nerve pain in my hands, like, where, like, flexing my hands like this just causes these, like, twinges of pain through my fingers, and it just really hurts. Or I'll have days where, like, my fingers are so swollen that it hurts to, like, touch myself, and my nerves are just so sensitive that it just, like, it hurts. And, then I can't write. And then I have some days where I'm just so tired of being in pain, and not even just being in pain, but just being, like, slightly uncomfortable, like, all day it's like I'm just kind of like, oh, my hand, oh, this, like, it's fine, I can still work, but, like, oh, kind of uncomfortable, and it's just draining. And you don't realize that, like, when the first week or so of it, I was like, this isn't that bad, if this doesn't get worse, like, I can still do everything just fine, I just need to, like, learn to push through it and ignore it. And it doesn't necessarily work like that. Like, you can find ways to lessen the symptoms and make it easier to do the things that you want to do or the things you have to do. But also, it's just, like, if you see a lot of talks of, like, chronic pain and chronic conditions, like, they talk about spoons, and you only have so many spoons that you can give to different things, and once you've used up your spoons, you're out. And being in pain, I feel like, reduces the number of spoons that you have. So I just don't have the energy to parent my children and deal with dinner and cook everything and write and stay on top of the laundry and do all of these things, and things slip. And when I'm not doing well, things fall apart a little bit. And, I've mostly been staying on top of it, but this ties us back into this conversation on toxic productivity, because I think there are times in my life where I've definitely dealt with toxic productivity, and I think it's something that I lean towards. I think it is something that I have had to put a lot of growth in recently. Like, I've been learning how much I am not aware of how stressed I am and not aware of when I need time to rest, and that's something that I was working on. I think I mentioned it in some of my videos at the end of last year, but like just working on being aware of how stressed I actually am and listening to my body and listening to myself when I'm at my limit. Like, I've done a lot of growth in that, and I think isolated that, removing the health issues, like, I think I've done really well, but it is something that I tend towards still. But on the flip side of that, like, I have this issue where if I feel like I'm not accomplishing my goals or not staying on top of them enough, I just kind of stop. And I used to have this period of time where I just, like, would go months and months and months without writing. And this was many years ago, but I'm terrified that if I stop, I won't get back into it. And this is something that, you know, I think J.C. Carpenter talked about a little bit, just this fear of, if you stop, are you going to be able to keep it going? Like, that fear of losing the momentum you have is real. And now that I have these health issues where I really can't push myself and I can't always keep my own goals and deadlines as kind as they are, or as, you know, like, I have to give myself a lot more grace and flexibility, and I keep having this tendency towards wanting to push myself harder and like, oh, well, I need to make up for this time. I'm not hitting my goals. Things are taking longer because I've been taking too many days off, and I keep having this inclination to think like, oh, I'm lazy, I'm playing too many video games, I'm doing all this stuff, and it's like, no, I have chronic pain, like chronic discomfort, like whatever you want to call it. Like, it's really not that bad, but it impacts how much I can get done. And if it's gonna get better, then, you know, that'll make my life easier. But if it's not, or if it's gonna get worse, I need to listen to myself. And if I give myself the rest when I need the rest, then I don't have to make it worse down the road and lose even more time. Like, I just need to be graceful with I need to give myself grace, right? That's the phrase that I feel like is really popular now. So I think that I'm really happy to be seeing these videos on AuthorTube talking about toxic productivity, and I hope that, you know, as all of these videos kind of come out and people are kind of thinking about this and working on this, I hope we see a lot of new ways to sort of track productivity and plan things, and people have a lot more resources available to them for how to avoid toxic productivity and be aware of it if that's something that they're experiencing. And this is something that I want to make sure that I talk about too, and I want to also, you know, consume their content and get more ideas. The main thing that's been really helpful for me lately is that I switched from having like daily goals. Like, I don't have a month planned out anymore. I track what I'm doing, and that is motivation for me to try and push forward, but then I don't have any holes. I'm never behind if I have to take a day, and that's been really, really good for me. So I think I already pulled these out, but basically I keep track of how much I work on things, both so that I have a more realistic idea of how much I can get done, and I can sort of do rougher, larger scale goals. But, you know, I can keep track of how often I'm being consistent, and, you know, if I'm not feeling good and I only get a little bit of work done, I still get a sticker. And then I have another calendar where I just track milestones, and this is like progress. So this is what's really motivating me to, like, oh, I haven't made any progress lately. I'm feeling really good today. Let's go, you know? And that's been very, very helpful for me and very motivating, and I definitely want to keep doing that and kind of building onto that. But I think it's so important to listen to yourself and the things that motivate you and the things that make you feel burnt out, because tracking every single day, like having month goals of, okay, I'm going to do this much writing this day, this much writing this day, that was burning me out so bad. Like, I just couldn't do it. And once I'd fallen off, I just felt so behind and just staring at these numbers that I just wasn't going to hit. Like, it just did not work for me. So that is something I'm also going to really avoid during NaNoWriMo this year. But yes, I'm very pro tracking, and I do still like to have like high level goals kind of month by month of what I'm going to do when. But if I have to push those out, I push those out. Like, they are not set in stone. Like, by this day, I want to accomplish this. It's sort of like you have the year, and it's like roughly here to roughly here. I think I'll work on this, but I keep it flexible. And that's sort of been working for me so far. So, I don't know. If you suffer from, chronic pain or health problems or migraines or anything really, like, my heart goes out to you. This is something I've only been experiencing really for 6 months, and it's really hard. And honestly, like, having a little bit of nerve pain in my hand, it's really not that bad. Like, compared to some of the things that people still manage to write through, like, it's really not that bad. And if you go through this and you have kind of some things that have helped you, post those in the comments below. But I don't know. I sort of feel drained of this topic now that I've kind of said it all and gotten it out. But yeah, if you have questions about anything, about my health problems, about, ideas for dealing with toxic productivity, if you suffer from toxic productivity and lean into that, let me know down below, and let's start a conversation about it. I'll see you next time.